my interpretation, and you read it in some of the history of AA, it's really not about being hypocritical, it's about being paradoxical. And I think the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps, and the culture is inherently one big fucking paradox. And then I think in a word, paradox, we could say, like, that's what psychedelics are about. This idea of paradoxicality, this idea of dual and non-dual.
Welcome to Entrepreneurs in Recovery, a podcast where we explore entrepreneurship, recovery, resilience, and the healing power of psychedelics. So if this is your first time here, welcome. Really grateful that you are here. If you check out today's episode and you enjoy the episode, would you please leave me a review on Spotify or iTunes? You can also go to YouTube and subscribe and like and comment on the episode. I'd really appreciate that as we continue to grow. And right now, I'm really just excited about the guests that are coming on, the guests that are reaching out to be on the show. The show is starting to grow. I am really grateful that the focus has been on the show. If you are enjoying the show, just let me know. Go into the comments of this video, of this podcast, and go ahead and send me a note, send me a message. Or if you want to bring on some guests, if you're like, Jesse, I would love for you to interview this person or that person, just go ahead and reach out, send me a message, and let me know. So with that said, I'm also going to extend my invitation to work with me one-on-one. And if you want to learn more about working with me one-on-one through coaching, you can go to jesseharless.com/coaching, and that will explain my background, my education, and how I work with individuals. With that said, I want to introduce today's guest, Dr. Rick Barnett. I've been waiting quite a while for this episode. Rick is a personal friend. We came through the 5 training together. And if you don't know what the 5 training is, you can go back to Joelle and Victoria's episode. You can listen to the God Molecule episode on my podcast where we talk about the 5-MeO DMT training that I went through in Mexico. And anyways, Dr. Rick, we dove deeply into the 12-step recovery process we've both been through, how we've molded and changed and shaped our points of view with still giving a lot of respect to the recovery process, the traditional recovery process. But we talk about psychedelics and incorporating that into our journey. And Dr. Rick is a clinical psychologist. He is someone who has his own practice where he helps people to utilize the healing potential of psychedelics in his practice. And you get to also hear about Dr. Rick's take on SSRIs and really the future and the evolution of substance use disorder and addiction recovery and where it's going. You can also hear about his upcoming retreat. If you want to work with Rick, he has a retreat coming up called Men in Recovery. So this is just a fantastic episode. I hope you enjoy it. Have a great day. Hey, Dr. Rick Barnett, welcome to the show.
Jesse, good to see you.
Good to see you too. And I feel like this is a long time coming. And everything happens when it's supposed to happen, and it's all come together, get you on at this point. And now, you're doing all these things, and we're going to get into them on the show. And they're very relevant for me and for the direction of the show. And a lot of the conversations we've been having and continuing to have, some really big, important conversations about psychedelics in recovery, and much more, and the studies and things that are emerging, even the studies that you've worked on, and I don't even believe it's been published yet, but we'll get into some of these things on the show. But just good to see your face, and just to start out too, for the audience to know, I usually tell people how did I meet the guest, and I met Dr. Rick through a training called 5. And if you have listened to the podcast before, you have heard about this training, which is the 5-MeO Information and Vital Education Training, which is a trauma-informed facilitator training, which we're going to get into on this show. But I met you through that training, and that was a really thorough training. And we met each other like at least 40 times, I think, on Zoom, or 45 times in our classes. And then met each other in Mexico, and we'll get into that a little bit too. But yeah, so we have that personal connection. We stayed in touch, and yeah,
Yeah,
we're
it was
still
great. I mean,
going.
to learn, I didn't know during some of those first Zoom sessions that you were somebody who identified as being in recovery and had a whole history of addiction, and all the stuff that you've been doing in terms of your podcast and the changes that you've made over the course of your life and growth. And so meeting you in person, and we're like, okay, that's why there's such a strong connection there. Meeting in person, 2.5 years ago, a year and a half ago, but first meeting 2.5 years ago. And here we are now doing this podcast. And yeah, I'm excited to dive into the topics. Your podcast is awesome. You've got great guests on. I'm humbled and honored to be one of them.
Well, thanks so much. And I'm super grateful to have you on and tap into your zone of genius and expertise and also your story. And I'd like to start with the story a little bit. I want to get to know your story of, I don't even know that story because I didn't get to sit with you in the halls, or I didn't get to sit you in meetings, or I didn't get that backstory. I still don't really know it. So I'd love to just hear, at whatever level you want to tell the story, kind of the old Rick, the Rick that, how did it start for you, and then led into the addiction issues, and then how you became the Rick today. And, I'll just come in and interrupt you at some point.
Yeah. Well, I could do the long version, the short version. The short version is, I grew up here in Stowe, Vermont, which is where I'm located now. Stowe, Vermont, as many people are familiar with. If you're not, it's a classic New England ski town, pretty well known for a long time for being, trustafarian, trust fund, people coming up from the city, coming up to Stowe. People have heard of Killington, Sugarbush. Stowe is one of the ski resorts, and also, frankly, a summer resort area. So it's sort of an affluent town. But I grew up in this town, and growing up in this town, you don't appreciate anything really. You're just a kid going to school, riding your dirt bike around, and you get kind of bored. And I just fell into a situation where I was bored and very social guy, like to hang out with people. And, I became like, one of the people who got into alcohol and drugs from an early age, and took on a somewhat of a leadership role in that position as someone who liked to drink and do drugs in this quaint little town. No good reason for it other than I was drawn to that activity. It's not like I come from a horrific trauma background or any kind of major reason. Why did I turn to alcohol and drugs at such a young age? I mean, started smoking cigarettes at 10 years old. Not many people start smoking cigarettes at 10 years old. Some people do. Some people start shooting heroin at 11 or 12 years old. Well, I started smoking when I was 10, started drinking and smoking weed when I was 11. And, by the time I was 15, I'd done coke and LSD and ecstasy and mushrooms and, you name it. And so for 5 more years, I muddled my way through, graduated high school, and flamed out of the University of Vermont because I was partying so hard and was put on academic and disciplinary probation. It was just a total shit show. Dropped out, took a leave, and eventually just got really sick physically and was hospitalized. Despite the numerous arrests and car accidents and being kicked out of apartments and my parents' house and stuff, for some reason it was being thrown in the hospital with acute pancreatitis that enabled me to be open to the message of recovery. But really, one of the reasons why we're here right now is that I don't think I would have been open to the message of recovery from my addiction if it wasn't for my use of psychedelics when I was a few years younger. I really felt as though psychedelics did something to me, both positive and negative at that time. It really opened my mind to a new way of seeing the world, being receptive to ideas about spirituality and all the, other realities that are available to us. Of course, it took a dark turn, and I just, became your garden variety, like, let's just get hammered 24/7 kind of guy. But because of my psychedelic experiences, I was open to the message of recovery. I went to rehab, and, my life changed dramatically from that point on. I was able to get back into college and pursue college and graduate education. And all of that was down in New York City. And eventually, after all of my education and training and long-term sobriety in New York City. I moved back to Stowe, Vermont, where I've been here since 2004. So I've been back in Vermont for 20 years, and I'm in private practice. I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, clinical psychologist. And when psychedelics came back into the foreground with, frankly, Michael Pollan's book in 2018, 2019, for me, it was like coming home, like full circle story, coming home back to why I'm even a psychologist, why I'm even in recovery, why I'm even interested in this stuff is because of psychedelics, frankly. So, and that's how we met. You know, I wanted to pursue my education and training in the psychedelic therapy and research world. So I did several trainings, and eventually led me to the 5 training, because 5-MeO-DMT is, affectionately known as the God molecule, the sort of one of the most potent psychedelics there are out there. And I really wanted to learn about it, and it was a great training, and that's how we met. So that's how we're here. That's my origin story.
Yeah, what a story. I'm really curious about the arc of the recovery process for you, because different people have stories of recovery. Sometimes it involves their own solo journey. They do it on their own, which is most people who find recovery, believe it or not, is they find their own path. But many people try 12 steps, or they try a religion, or whatever is working, or a combination of things. What was it for you? What was the catalyst that kicked you off into getting, sober, and then eventually finding psychedelics? But what was the catalyst, your recovery process?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely come from a lineage of 12-step recovery, big time. It's the foundation of how I learned to live life without alcohol and drugs. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for 12-step principles, 12-step meetings, people in 12-step recovery. It's something near and dear to my heart. And, I don't think I would have been as receptive to that method of recovery, again, as I said before, had it not been for my use of psychedelics and understanding that there are different ways that we can understand ourselves, the world, concepts of spirituality. So when I went to rehab and started learning, going to meetings, learning about the 12 steps, I just wasn't sold on it. Simply like, okay, so you're telling me that this is how to get sober. It's written in the big book here, and here are the steps. And I was like, all of it seemed interesting to me and seemed relevant, but I wasn't just going to accept it on face value. And because I knew because of my psychedelic experiences, I knew there was broader interpretations of these principles that I was learning in 12 steps. So I looked at like all the other religions, philosophies, spiritualities, psychologies, and it's why I became a psychologist, because I wanted to understand the mind even more deeply than what the 12 steps have to offer. Paradoxically, I believe the 12 steps have everything one needs to live a full and rich life, and all of the principles are consistent with universal principles, even principles associated with psychedelics and psychedelic experiences. So all of it's just one big harmonious thing. I think on my way down here to come to this podcast to meet with you, I was thinking about what you just said, which is that most people who have problems with addiction or alcohol or whatever are what is called spontaneous remitters. They just go into spontaneous remission. Something happens for whatever reason. They wake up differently one morning. They see their child a certain way. There's a car accident. Something changes in them, and they're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. They don't go to fucking rehab. They don't go to 12-step programs. They just say, I don't want to do this anymore. That was a shit show. I don't want to do. There's a lore in 12-step ideology and culture that if you're not going to meetings 24/7, you're not doing your 90 and 90, you don't have a sponsor, you're not working the steps, you don't keep coming back. It works if you work it. That somehow anybody who doesn't do that and they just leave the program, that they're bound to relapse. And I always knew that wasn't true. I also am somebody who has a healthy amount of skepticism for my own thinking, so that I don't want to just assume that I could simply leave AA and then just be fine. Like I'll just be sober and live a healthy recovery life into for the rest of my life. So I still attend meetings periodically. They're still near and dear to my heart. I believe in them. I don't go as frequently, but I also don't believe that people who don't continue to go to 12-step meetings are doomed to relapse and, relive the horrific lives that they were living in active addiction. Most people either spontaneously remit, they go to treatment, they stop drinking, or they go into a moderation process. The 12 steps is just one tool, one lifestyle that several of us really gravitate towards and find really useful on an ongoing basis, but some people don't, and that's fine.
So I know that you have gone to Psychedelics in Recovery because Kevin and I know you've attended those meetings. So when you say you're still going, are you going to traditional AA or your Psychedelics in Recovery, or both?
I go to both, but less frequently to traditional AA meetings nowadays, but more frequently. I'm on the board of Psychedelics in Recovery with Kevin, so I'm pretty involved with that, the continuing growth of that organization. But I also attend those meetings pretty regularly. I would say weekly.
Online, right?
All online. Yeah.
Yeah. So if someone's listening to this for the first time and they're like, what are you talking about? So there's an organization called Psychedelics in Recovery, which is combining principles from even AA with psychedelics, and it's open conversation. And that is, something obviously really needed in this day and age and where we're going, and especially post-COVID. I mean, people didn't forget what we just went through, and we're not even close to feeling the ramifications of what we just went through. That aftermath of COVID is just beginning of the after detrimental effects. Maybe we can get into a little bit of kind of I don't know what they're calling it, but the aftermath of COVID and on mental health and society. And we felt it during it, but we're definitely going to feel it now and for the coming years. So to look at something like Psychedelics in Recovery or psychedelics or some of these different healing modalities is critical. It's not even up for debate anymore. And so I am grateful that exists. And thank you for sharing that openly too. I do have a curiosity. Why do you think there's doom and gloom? Where did that come from? Did Bill Wilson specifically say, hey, if you don't do 90-90, or if you don't go to meetings every day, you're going to die? Like, where did that come from? That intense survivalism, the intense black or white thinking of like death upon stopping going to meetings?
It's great. I mean, it's a great question, and it's a great curiosity because, as to my knowledge, there isn't anything written in the literature, in 12-step literature, like AA approved literature, the big book, Pass It On, the even As Bill Sees It book, or the 12 and 12, whatever it is. Like, there's nothing that's written in there that says you have to have a sponsor, you have to do a 90-90. If you don't go to meetings, you're going to relapse. And what I think has happened is, and this happens just as human nature, and we can't really blame people for it, but we do have a tendency to become dogmatic, and we have a tendency to interpret things through the lens of whatever our preconceived notions might be. And so I think people in AA, personality, they say principles before personalities. Personalities in AA glob onto aspects of the program, whether it's oral transmission or written documents, and they interpret it in certain ways, and they come up with these what end up sounding like truisms, like, these are things you have to do, and if you don't, you are doomed. And the truth is, there's really nothing there. There's language in the big book, for example, we have to let go absolutely, or there's language in there, the result was nil until we let go completely, or like there's
Sure.
some extreme language in there that then people extract and then they repeat over and over again, and that becomes sort of some sort of truism. But the thing I think a lot of people forget, if you go to enough meetings and you read the literature enough times, a lot of people will read some of it as, or interpret some of it as hypocritical. You're saying this, but people are doing that. And just like, the same criticism of like Catholic people who go to church are pretending like they're all faithful and stuff. And meanwhile, behind closed doors are doing X, Y, and Z, or not even behind closed door, they're doing X, Y, and Z. And I think there's this idea that it's hypocritical to say one thing and do another. But my interpretation, and you read it in some of the history of AA, it's really not about being hypocritical. It's about being paradoxical. And I think the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps, and the culture is inherently one big fucking paradox. And then I think in a word, paradox, we could say, like, that's what psychedelics are about. This idea of paradoxicality, this idea of dual and non-dual, and all the stuff that we learn in the wisdom traditions. This concept of paradox is a huge concept, and it's just AA 12 steps has its own version of that. It's not hypocritical. It just depends on the way you look at it. So the doom and gloom, I think, comes from personalities, people who just extract certain things from the program and then just repeat them and then browbeat other people coming into the program with it. And if you have half a brain, you'd be like, I like to believe some of what's going on here, but I'm not going to believe all of it. And I get to make my own choices, even though my own choices are being filtered through a diseased mind. My diseased mind is also my mind, and it has healthy aspects to it too. And I can exercise some form of judgment, taking in information from the outside world, using some form of intelligence inside me, some wisdom inside me. And the harmony between those two things, yields good results. It's not one or the other, And I think in AA, it's often this black and white dogmatic interpretation of things, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense too, because what is the number of people in AA who have trauma?
Right.
All of them, maybe. And I think like when you think about survival, when you're in trauma, especially if childhood trauma, high ACEs scores, adverse childhood experiences, when someone's telling you, hey, if you drink, you die, that's like extreme. So that is oftentimes how life was. That's why we drank. That's why we drugged. So to give that type of message, it's like, okay, I got to be on guard, and that's like how our nervous system is wired anyway. So it just goes right fitting with it. But does that serve ultimately for some, not for most, even for Bill Wilson, right? Because Bill Wilson eventually was like depressed. I heard about his sex addiction, and then he eventually went and got help with LSD, and then wanted to bring that back into AA, back into the steps. And then the internal politics of AA didn't allow it. But this is well documented. Michael Pollan, many people have talked about Bill Wilson. And it's so curious to think about when you think about the big book, and there's a quote in the big book, right? And We Agnostics, its main object, the whole point of the book, the whole point of the program is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which that's God or source, and which can solve your problem, which is very interesting. And you think about 5-MeO DMT or different psychedelics, which is, what are you ultimately doing? You're connecting to a power that sometimes you found out is you and connected to all through it. But it's really interesting, the paradox of where the founder went for help and seeking for his mental health, went to LSD.
Right.
It's very paradoxical.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, for all of Bill Wilson's faults, he co-created with many other people a program that contains innumerable paradoxes, and his life, his own personal journey also contains those paradoxes. And my understanding of having read biographies on Bill Wilson, there's actually a new documentary that just came out. I have to find that for you, but he wasn't. I don't think he was dogmatic himself. I think he was always open-minded, looking for new ways to help people, and even like the early days of when he started realizing he was creating Alcoholics Anonymous, he went out of Towns Hospital in New York City saying, I found God, I'm going to go help people. His white light experience. And he came back to the physician back at the hospital where he got sober. It's like, I don't understand it. I can't seem to get anybody sober. I found God and no one's listening to me. And the physician was like, leave the God stuff alone. Just talk about your experience and, who you are as a human being, and keep it based on like sort of more grounded experience. And he went out and he just found he was open. Anyway, he was open to like other ways of like how do I get a message out? What's going to help more people? And I think he did that with LSD. He found LSD to be particularly useful, and he was really excited about it. And he started, talking about it more and more, and wanting to get people more involved in it in AA. And I don't know if it was wise or unwise that the powers that be in AA at that time, sort of politically or otherwise, just squashed it. It could have been a good thing. It could have been a good thing that, for whatever reason, Bill Wilson's experiments with LSD did not reach mainstream, because what happened shortly thereafter was that LSD and psychedelics were demonized. And if LSD was associated with Bill Wilson and Alcoholics Anonymous at that time, then I'm pretty sure Alcoholics Anonymous would have been demonized as well. And that would have been the end of Alcoholics Anonymous. And you and I wouldn't be sitting here today living the lives that we're living, partly because, our experience with 12-step recovery has been helpful.
And that's so much irony, isn't it? Like, oh my God, if he would have had his way, I wouldn't even be here right now talking about this. Oh my God. It's so crazy to think about that. Like, wow, I've never thought about that. Yeah, getting caught in that exact time, because in the 50s, you had the studies coming out about LSD and helping with alcoholism. And then the 60s come, war on drugs, everything, lump them all in there. None of them have any type of medicinal use. And it's like, okay, sure. But to think of that, wow, I literally, I wouldn't have had, met my closest friend and had the all these different things that I found through a community, which there's communal capital in AA. You have the community. It's one of the core aspects of tribal society and surviving in life, and how we've done it for eons. But you can get that in a fellowship like that. And so obviously there's massive gratitude. Anyone who's listened to this podcast, it's not to shit on AA or any of that. It's about just looking at it from different lenses. Because I heard this quote one time: you can't understand something till you leave it. And then you can really start to look at it from more of an objective lens. So I can see like the beauty in the 12 steps, the beauty in the program, and then see, okay, the flaws, the deficits. And some of that's just the people who still hold on to rigid black and white thinking, when even Bill Wilson, it's hard to imagine that he was like that. So yeah, really, that's a really fascinating.
Yeah.
So
it plays out. I mean, honestly, it plays out in psychedelics and recovery meetings. That community has had massive growing pains. And to some extent, it's a wonder that I still attend. I'm on the board. I mean, I believe in community, basically. I believe in community. And I also believe that a 12-step lineage is a worthwhile lineage to maintain respect for, and some adherence to some basic ideas contained in 12-step philosophy, 12-step principles. And so bringing those two together, what you see in psychedelics and recovery is, again, paradoxical or ironic or whatever. You have some people in psychedelics and recovery who are these hardcore traditional AA people that really just want to replicate AA or a 12-step program, but be able to talk about psychedelics, but keep it focused on the steps and the principles and all that kind of stuff. And then you have people in psychedelics and recovery who are like, AA sucks. I hate AA. AA never worked for me. It's a bunch of blah, 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 and a lot of AA bashing going on. But I want to be sober. I want to be in a community with people who understand addiction, who are open-minded about psychedelics and sharing their experiences. And even in those people who bash AA and psychedelics and recovery, they understand that there's something about community, if it's well, the strength of the 12-step, because it's been around for so long, there's embedded within it a culture of relating to one another that has some sort of built-in understandings of how to relate to one another that keeps people feeling safe. My experience of going to general addiction recovery meetings where psychedelics are part of the conversation is that the dialogue and the people's sharing and whatever, it just goes all over the place. There's no container. There's no system of unspoken rules of how to communicate about addiction, about recovery, about their psychedelic experiences. So people just come in tripping their balls off, and they're talking about their last trip, and oh yeah, I haven't had a drink for a day or two, but like anyway, this is great. I'm in recovery, and blah. And there's no form to it. There's no shape, and I think the 12-step lineage has a culture where it's like, this is the way we can talk about these things. And this is like, people raise their hand, and we cut down on crosstalk, and people share from the floor, and I really identify with what you just said, and I'm having this experience, and then it goes on to the next person, and there's someone chairing the meeting, but they're not the leader, and all these different things that we take for granted in AA, but it actually provides a really perfect container to be able to have a wide-ranging discussion, but still keep it somewhat focused. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to find that anywhere.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, this is something that what we're talking about is so triggering, and that's really good. This is a good thing, because you should be triggered for your beliefs. And why am I triggered? And I think I see people who said, I went to AA, and then it's like, well, how long did you go? And it was like, well, I went for 4 days or for 4 weeks. Like, I went for 15 years personally. I'm pretty insane, I guess. Like I went, and the thing is why I'm saying that is I went to thousands of meetings, all different types. And what you're saying is there was structure, and structure creates clarity. It creates culture. And so that structure helps, even though it can be sometimes feel rigid to people. It can help. That's the masculine, right? The masculine, it's creating structure so there can be some order and chaos. And it's just as a principle as old as time. You need that. And then now we can get things done. It's like being in a business meeting, and it's like, okay, this guy's going to guide the meeting and a structure. And that's why I personally studied appreciative inquiry. And I studied like, how do you actually create structure in this chaos of 400 people in a room so that we can actually get shit done? And so that's really true. And I think you can see the success if you go deeper into that, those kind of fundamentals, even if just that masculine principle of structure. Yeah. And yeah. Fascinating.
So it plays out in psychedelics and recovery. People don't want structure. They don't want the history of AA or the lineage there. They just want to just do whatever, talk about whatever. And then there's other people who's like, no, we need to do it this way, the hardcore, old school, traditional AA way. And it's like, I keep going, and it's like, we're finding our legs in that community where there's room for everybody, whatever your particular opinion is. There's, excuse me, there's room for that. There's room to disagree. There's room to have differences of opinion. I've been super triggered in psychedelics and recovery meetings with people bashing the crap out of AA. And it's like, that's not like, I don't want to keep coming back to these meetings if it's just an AA bashing session and yay, we get to talk about psychedelics. Like, that's just not fun for me. And I'm also not really interested in going to psychedelics and recovery if all we're doing is reading the big book and not talking about how psychedelics relate to this at all. It's just it's not helpful to me. We need to have both. And it's working great. There's a lot of meetings, and I know you had Kevin on, and anybody who's listening to this episode, you should go back and listen to the episode with Kevin Franciotti, who's the co-founder of Psychedelics and Recovery. And it's really just a fascinating, growing community where, it's getting more and more traction. And the concept of psychedelic sobriety is something that's near and dear to my heart. It's there is a path forward where people who are in active addiction, early in their recovery, midway through the recovery, relapsing, or in long-term recovery, where the use of psychedelics with intention fits in very, very nicely. How to do that, when to do that, dosage, setting, all that kind of stuff is up for much debate. But it's psychedelic sobriety is something that is worth striving for, I think.
Yeah, and I think the thing is too is your expertise, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on too. I mean, you're someone who has studied this. You're familiar with ketamine-assisted therapy in your practice. You were trained at MAPS. So let's talk about some of that too, some of your training, and then we can get into even this study that I don't know if it was released yet, but you were part of a peer-reviewed study. And access to psychedelics. But I'd like to get into some of your expertise here too, because when we talk about people who are going to meetings and even just not going to meetings, they're coming from this world of just trying to get help and trying to get better. And then you think about SSRIs. I'm not trying to combine too many things right now, but you think about SSRIs and like you are altering your consciousness there. And we alter our consciousness every night in sleep, So it's like we look at these things because of the war on drugs, because of the narratives, and because it's prescribed by a white coat doctor, like we have this really mixed, this why the Renaissance is happening now is because of, I think what you're going to see, and this is what I want to get into next with you too, is you're going to see people who are going to meetings or not going to meetings in recovery, they're going to access, okay, if there's not ketamine-assisted therapy, it's going to be psilocybin-assisted therapy. It's going to be potentially MDMA-assisted therapy. And it's going to be normalized. It's going to be on Oprah. It's going to be everyone talking about it. And they're going to be like, oh, no, I do that. Yeah, just like I can get prescribed opioids if I hurt my teeth. I'm still sober. I'm following the 12 steps, but I had to get that by prescription. It's going to be a prescriptive order to psychedelics for instead of SSRIs or maybe even with them tapered down. I don't know what the future is going to hold, but I'd like to kind of get into that, your background and some of these discussions. Maybe we'll just start with the first one, which let's talk about the SSRIs and psychedelics. And, that's a big discussion right now. And I think they're coming up for debate. So what's kind of the take on SSRIs and and not just for the short term, but for the long term, even the types of effects it could have long term, and then what are we seeing with psychedelics in your research and studies, and even with ketamine assisted therapy, all these different things.
There's a lot of different ways we could tackle that. But just going back to my training, as just one particular person, my training is pretty widely varied, so very clinically focused as a psychologist. I bring to the table a long-term personal experience in recovery from addiction with my own addiction history, which we've talked about. I got a master's degree in psychopharmacology, so I decided to do a deeper dive into psych meds or pharmacology in general to understand how all kinds of medications work in the brain and the body. And in addition to that, when psychedelics came on the scene in the last few years with the psychedelic renaissance, I decided to do the trainings like we talked about earlier in the show. I did the California Institute for Integral Studies. I did ketamine-assisted psychotherapy training with the Polaris Insight Center in San Francisco. Did another one with Prati, which is out of Colorado, another ketamine group, and then the 5 training. So I'm bringing to the table a deep understanding of psychopharmacology, a solid understanding of psychedelics, a solid understanding of psychology, and a solid understanding of addiction and recovery from different vantage points. And, I do think that there's a lot of misinformation out there about psychedelics when it comes to interactions with SSRIs or the hype or the harms around psychedelics. I think there's a lot of misinformation about the hype and the harms around SSRIs. A lot of people come into psychedelics or even psychedelics in recovery, and they're not just fed up with AA. They're fed up with the Western medical system. They've been prescribed all kinds of psychiatric medications. They feel betrayed or taken advantage of by the pharmaceutical industry and physicians or other prescribers who just prescribe medications like crazy and nothing ever worked. And they come to psychedelics with this idea that I'll just stop all my psych meds and I'll just do microdosing LSD or mushrooms and I'm just going to do that. Now, some people are successful at doing that. We heard stories about people like, I got off all my psych meds and all I do is, a hero dose, a macro dose of psilocybin once every 6 months to reset my brain. And I'm good. I'm so grateful I'm off my psych meds. Well, that's great. There's also people who hear that you're not supposed to do MDMA or psilocybin if you're taking Zoloft. So they've been on Zoloft for 20 years and they hear that, oh, you can't mix the two. It's dangerous. You're going to get serotonin syndrome. And they come off their Lexapro or their Zoloft or whatever it is. And, they're just doing it because that's what they heard. No one's sort of, or they're getting bad advice from people. And it's not a good situation because they get suicidal or they get really depressed because they're coming off their SSRI that they've been on for a long time, and the psychedelic didn't work, and they're just super depressed now, and they don't know what to do. So there's a way to actually understand these dynamics in a educated, thoughtful, and well supported way. And I think one of your guests we talked about earlier before we started recording, Ben Malcolm, the spirit pharmacist, who I think you did an episode with as well, and maybe he's coming back for another one. He's done a terrific job of dispelling these myths. And it's not like it's a black and white, you have to come off your SSRIs in order to have a psychedelic experience. You just need to be thoughtful about what you're doing. And the research bears that out. I'm not sure what research you're referring to that I've been involved in other than the EEG study with 5-MeO-DMT down at Tandava. So in 2024, I was one of 31 participants who basically had a EEG machine hooked up to his head or her head and had a flood dose of 5-MeO-DMT so they could measure my brainwave activity. And then it was followed up by something called microphenomenology, where this is pretty funny, actually. Could you imagine coming out of a full release dose of 5-MeO-DMT and literally on the 25th minute after you took that big and had that big experience, you're walking out of the temple and you're going over to a little side area and sitting down with a researcher, and he's asking you, so what were you thinking when you took the big inhale, and then what happened next? Okay, describe that to me. And now what happened next? Okay, now describe that to me. And he's sitting there writing notes, and you're like, I just became,
that's a lot.
I just became one with I can't, ineffable is an actual word. You can't describe it. And yet here I was with a researcher trying to document what happened. Anyway, it's a thing called microphenomenology, and the people at University College London and Imperial College over in the UK, they're doing some great work with microphenomenology, really trying to document what's actually going on phenomenologically in the brain, in people's experiences. That's Chris Timmerman and James Sanders and David Arizzo and those guys, really great people doing some good work. It's just comical in a way to try to document that stuff. And they did publish those studies. I can't really tell you because I'm not super versed in EEG technology or language and what the brainwave patterns actually mean subjectively if you're to interpret them, except I think what I could glean from what they discovered was that what they found was that it wasn't as though there was some sort of I think there's like some top-down processing. So you have alpha waves and beta waves. And when you're waking consciousness, you have certain brainwave activity. So you would expect when you do 5-MeO-DMT, a flood dose, like everything quiets down. And there's just this really base level of neural activity at an electrical level in your brain. And they didn't quite find that. They found that there was a lot of different things going on a flood dose. Of it wasn't just that you were just like knocked offline and one with the universe. There was stuff happening, and I can't really tell you more than that. But they did publish the result.
Yeah. No, that's great. I realize I packed a whole word salad into my question, and I want to come back to I love what let's go there next about the 5-MeO and even our training a little bit we were in. But so come back to the SSRI discussion. You treat people in your practice with obviously addiction, severe addiction, mental health challenges. And yeah, I'm just curious about where do you see the future with antidepressants, SSRIs? Obviously you mentioned Dr. Ben Malcolm. We had him on the show. But I'm curious about your take with I have people reaching out to me now in that arena who have no history. They're not even, it's not even about addiction. They just are, they're mothers, and they have, some of them have bipolar, or some of them are just depressed because life is challenging right now. And especially post COVID, this is what I'm talking about, this wave. And so this wave that's coming, and it's already been, people are really stocking up with these medicines to try to just cope with everyday life. What do you see happening with these types of therapies, whether it's low dose ketamine-assisted therapy or maybe higher doses in a therapeutic type of setting? Or are there any breakthrough therapies that you're seeing that are sort of replacements, or are SSRIs, antidepressants, here to stay? Like, what are you seeing, and what's your research there?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what I'm seeing is that I think the proliferation of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, or ketamine treatments, is going to continue. So there's going to be a continued expansion of the use of ketamine for all kinds of conditions, whether it's alcohol use disorder, gambling use disorder, treatment-resistant depression, major depressive disorder, PTSD, bipolar disorder, anxiety, you name it. Ketamine, cuts across all those diagnoses and could be helpful for some of those people some of the time. It's not a cure-all. And the benefit of ketamine is that you can have ketamine experiences and be on different types of psychiatric medications at the same time. There's no contraindication there. There's a couple of exceptions to that, maybe lithium, and to some extent there's some evidence that lamotrigine, Lamictal, is potentially contraindicated. But other than that, like regular SSRIs and stuff, it's not contraindicated. So ketamine's FDA approved. It plays nice with other psych meds. And I think that's going to continue to expand in terms of access. They recently changed the rules around Spravato, which is S-ketamine, the only FDA-approved version of ketamine, even though ketamine is being used off-label, not just Spravato. But anyway, Spravato indication changed recently that before early 2025, you had to have failed or be on 2 SSRIs in order to qualify to be approved for Spravato treatment. Because that's what proves treatment-resistant depression, and that's what it was indicated for. But they actually removed that criteria in order to be approved for Spravato treatment. You don't have to be on an SSRI. You don't have to have failed. And they're also looking at ketamine head-to-head with electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, shocking the brain. And they're showing head-to-head clinical trials that not only is ketamine equally as effective as ECT, but in some cases, maybe even more effective, maybe a first-line treatment for some people. I really don't see SSRIs and other classic psych meds going away. I don't. They're not going to go away with the psychedelic revolution. Just like tricyclic antidepressants, in some cases barbiturates, old school psych meds are still used today. They're still used. And pretty soon, if not now, sertraline, Zoloft, fluoxetine, Prozac, Lexapro or escitalopram, citalopram, Celexa. These are going to be considered old school drugs if they aren't already now, but they're still going to be pretty widely available. They're going to be cheap. They're going to be accessible. They're going to work for some people. And this from being in the psychedelic space, there are people right now actively trying to produce the next generation SSRIs from psychedelics, but they're trying to manipulate the molecule so that you don't have a mystical experience, that you can have an antidepressant benefit from a psychedelic-like drug that doesn't make you trip, that can be scaled widely, and it'll be just the next generation SSRI, for lack of a better description. And that's actually being done. There's an argument for why that could be a good thing. I'm partial to the mystical experience personally, especially when it comes to addiction. But I can understand why researchers and the pharma industry is looking into profiting from that particular model of taking the psychedelic experience out of the psychedelic. So that's one of the things we're going to see. It's going to be fast-tracked. I bet you could probably get something like that approved much faster than getting something that comes with a severe mystical experience approved by the Food and Drug Administration, especially where therapy is concerned, because we know one of the reasons why MDMA, ecstasy, was not approved last August for post-traumatic stress disorder was because the FDA doesn't regulate therapy, and the application for approval insisted that therapy was an integral part of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. And the FDA was like, that's great, but we don't regulate therapy. So if your application says therapy has to be a part of it, we have to reject it because we don't do therapy, and I think that's a shame. And I think the FDA personally, and I don't mind saying this publicly, is a big pile of conflict of interest and not really doing its job in protecting the public. It's more red tape. So I don't believe in the FDA approval process personally, but I can understand their decision from that perspective. If you don't regulate psychotherapy, which they don't, then we can't approve this drug. I thought that was too bad. They could have found a workaround and still approved it. But those are some of the directions that we're going. I really don't think psychedelics are ever going to replace regular psych meds, period. There's just not. Psychedelics aren't for everybody, and SSRIs aren't for everybody. And, there's several people, just like you were saying before, about some people just spontaneously remit from their addiction. And some people go through a really bad depressive episode at some point in part of their life, and they don't need to be on meds or do psychedelics to stay relatively content and, prevent another depressive episode. It just happens. There's no one size fits all.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really important point. And, it's a fascinating take on that for sure. It's a balanced take because it's not going anywhere, not for eons. And I think that, that's the great way to look at it was what's coming down the pipe, what's already here. And it's a slow moving process, but it's moving, and we're seeing a lot of benefits. And I've personally benefited big time from these different therapies that people have heard on the episode. And I'm excited for it, and excited for close friends and family members to have this access to these types of treatments as they emerge. And we already have some now, like you said, ketamine-assisted therapy. And there's a really interesting study, though, that just came out about ketamine and that study about is ketamine more effective on its own for men and women, but for men, ketamine was more effective with just ketamine and not talk therapy as well. I thought that was very interesting because kind of it's against kind of the whole integration process, which is interesting. So who did that study? Where are the studies? We need more studies, because I look at my psychedelic assisted therapy journey has had talk therapy every single time. Even if it wasn't with a trained therapist, I had a empathetic witness that I paid or learned with and from, and I got to share these journeys, which was so pivotal. So what is the deal with that study about? What do you think about that? You've seen that study.
Oh, yeah, I
right?
saw the study, and you got to read the details of it. Of course, you look in the fine print and you can see that the funders of the study are, people who are the chief medical officers of the pharmaceutical company that produces ketamine. Obviously, it costs more.
There's no conflicts then. Okay,
yeah, there's all kinds of conflicts of interest, and also the methodology of how that study was conducted. How many of those people were actually receiving therapy, but the researchers weren't documenting that they had therapists, like private therapists, but they were considered to be in the group that was getting ketamine only because they weren't getting therapy through the study, but they were having their, so there's all if you read the details of it, it's just not, it was a very poorly designed study that has a lot of conflicts of interest in it. But, to your point, look, I'm a psychologist. I'm biased towards talk therapy. I believe that mental health, psychotherapy, talk therapy, non-pharmacological therapy is a valuable asset to the mental health treatment system that we have. But it's not the only game in town. And there are people for whom daily Prozac with no therapy helps them a lot. There are people who do ketamine treatments for 45 minutes, get hooked up to an IV machine twice a week, and there's no therapy, and they're not suicidal anymore, or they stop drinking, and they do that for 6 weeks or 12 weeks, and then they take a break for 3 to 6 months, and they go back again, and there's no therapy, and that's fine. There are people for whom that works, and so we shouldn't necessarily find ourselves in a situation where we're forcing people into a model that may not work for them. I'd like to guide people towards like the wraparound, full support model, so that, you do have a witness to your experience. You do have a guide, you have a therapist, someone that is there for the preparation and for the integration process and the ongoing support, maybe even be in the room with you while you're having a ketamine experience or another psychedelic experience, for sure. I think there's a lot of incentive in the broken Western medical system to keep therapy out of psychedelic treatments because it's too expensive. There arguably aren't enough providers. It's too expensive, and it just doesn't fit the machine that we have that we're working with. It bogs it down, and they want to streamline and make things efficient and make it most profitable. And if you insist on therapy, then it's going to overwhelm the system. So I understand that. I understand that psychotherapy isn't the end all be all, but I'm also partial to it as being, the safest and potentially more effective way to do it. That said, I'm also a strong advocate for community use models. I love underground practitioners who are unlicensed, who are doing the good work and doing the work safely, whether it's in the United States or in Costa Rica or in Mexico. They're not licensed clinicians, but they sure as hell know what they're doing, and they should be supported in their work. And so the Western medical model and therapy and drug delivery and all that kind of stuff is a bunch of hogwash in a whole sector of people who are doing fantastic work in the psychedelic world and really helping a lot of people. So you can see I try to play both sides of it. I love what I do as a clinician, but I also love what a lot of people are doing. And the medical model is by far not the only model to get people access, and also to provide the safeguards that people always talk about. It's not, you're not adding that much more of a layer of safeguards by funneling it through the medical system.
Right. Like, how many people do you know and I know that are some of the most incredible underground practitioners that don't come on my show, won't come on podcasts, nor should they. And they're doing the most incredible work for sometimes more than a decade. And there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn for them about set and setting and the way they set up care and the way they deliver through their ceremonies. And it's incredible. And it's been going on for eons, right? You look at the indigenous wisdom traditions and the way they serve medicine, and there's so much to learn there. And we're just kind of like trying to control everything in regulated boxes, which I understand because lives are at stake and people can die from, the misuse of this. But yeah, let's be honest. There's many friends that we have that I don't bring on the podcast because they're doing really great work in that sector. And thank God for them. Shout out to them. And many of us wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for them, these unnamed heroes. So I am curious about I know that you have, so let's get into the 5-MeO a little bit, because you have a retreat coming up in October, yep, right? And Tindava in Tepoztlán, Mexico. So I didn't even know about this until I saw a post about it in our little group that we have of our cohort that I came through with you through the 5 training. What is this Men in Recovery retreat? I'm a little envious. Maybe I'll just be on the sidelines and looking. But no, I'm curious about it. Tell me about it, and what does it involve? And
well, yeah, so Joelle and Victoria have an opportunity. They offer people like us who have been through the training, who know the facility, who know the medicine, who know the work, who they feel confident and they trust. They allow some of us to rent their property, to rent their retreat. And so, and they provide the food and the medicine and the facilities so that, like, I get to invite or, see who wants to come have a 5-MeO experience with me and Otto as a co-facilitator. And I decided the population that I wanted to offer this to for a first go round, renting Tindava from Joelle and Victoria, would be men in recovery, because it's something I'm comfortable with, that I identify with, and I believe it's a population of people that are in need that could benefit from the experience. And so that's how that came together as a first run at, renting the retreat center and running my own retreat. Why not do it with a group of men in recovery? So up to 6 men. I've got 2 or 3 people already signed up. and it's October 8th through the 12th from Wednesday to Sunday. And it's really just going to be, as you can imagine, people show up on a Wednesday night. We get to know each other after having done a lot of preparation and screening before they show up on campus. Get there on Wednesday night, get to know each other, give them an orientation about what to expect over the coming days, figure out the order of who's going to do medicine in what order the next day, and different routes of administration, all the stuff we learned in our training program actually coming into full practice. So doing it there is something very special for me because we spent so much time down there. We were there for 2 weeks in December of 2023, Jesse. And then I went back in January of 2024. I went back in May of 2024. I went back in October of 2024. And I went back in December of 2024. So I feel like that particular location and that retreat center is something that feels like somewhat of a second home for me. So to be able to do it down there, to rent the place and serve this amazing medicine and hoping people have a really robust experience. I know they will, regardless of anything. It's just such a wonderful place to have. I have a real kind of, as you can tell, I have a real attachment to that location. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very curious about the details of this retreat. So I want to go a little deeper. So like if someone's listening and they're a man in recovery and they're like, well, I've been listening to Jesse for months and man, I don't want to mess with my abstinence sobriety. I don't want to mess with any of that. But I am curious about maybe some of these potential this dysregulation I experience, and I also want to have a closer connection with my intuition and the different various reasons why people might come to a molecule like 5-MeO-DMT. What are the protocols? Are you talking about? Is it going to be lower dose, or are we going full release, or is that in the pre-integration sessions? You're learning about each of these, but what's kind of the go at this? Is it going to be getting the lamp of illumination, which many people maybe don't know what I'm talking about, but you could go back to Joelle and Victoria's episode on the show, or Chad Charles, the God Molecule episode when I brought him on. But what type of routes of administration are you choosing? Because, as I was learning in time, these lower doses of 5-MeO-DMT can be very effective. These lower doses, maybe a few doses in a row over a certain period of time in the same session. What kinds of thinking do you have around that? Curious.
Well, I'm just following the model. So as part of our training, as you know, they introduced us to all kinds of dosages, all kinds of routes of administration, all of which we tried ourselves, and some of the rationale behind why someone might choose this route of administration or this dosage and all that kind of stuff. But then I don't think you did this. Not many of us have done this. I followed up with some kind of like apprenticeship program. So when I said earlier, I went down in October of 2024, and again in December of 2024, I was basically a shadow for an actual retreat. So Joelle and Victoria have retreats every month there, maybe every other week. They have a group of 6 to 8 people come down, and they have a certain structure the way they do it. They come on a Wednesday night, and they serve medicine on Thursday and Friday, and then Saturday is a day of rest and integration, and Sunday they go home. And so I'm just following their model, which is basically in the back of my mind, my hope is for people who are feeling called to 5-MeO for whatever reason, they feel like they're called to have this experience. They'll come down, they'll do their research, there'll be preparation and screening, a little bit of education around this, and we'll make a collaborative decision about dosage and route of administration. That's what I got to witness, and that's what we got to do for our training program. We have all of that at our disposal. People can insufflate 15 milligrams with a straw, snort a line of 5-MeO-DMT if they want to. Some people don't have that cocaine association or whatever snorting lines of whatever association. Some people would see. So some people might insufflate it. Some people might use the vape pen, the lamp of illumination, which is the argonautilus, the argon gas. It's looks like a bong, basically, where you vaporize the 5-MeO-DMT for ideally a full release. So that's going to be a game day decision for people and a collaborative decision. I got to witness that time and time again when someone comes into the temple in the morning of ceremony and we say, how are you feeling today? What are you feeling about dosage? Did you feel like you wanted to go low dose or medium dose? Or you feel like you want to go all the way? 90% of people say, I want to do the full release on the first go, you know? And what I've seen on the second day, I mean, I have trouble imagining this as a participant. Maybe you can too. You've done 5-MeO DMT. I've done 5-MeO DMT. And doing a flood dose of 5-MeO DMT 2 days in a row sounds overwhelming to me personally. I don't know if I would choose that strategy, but some people do. Most people, I think, on the second day, game day decision, second day, they had a full release flood dose on the first day. The second day, they're like still like vibrating from day one. They're like, I think I'll just go in slow and I'll see how I feel. And maybe I'll go up a little bit after that because there's a lot of nerves, there's a lot of energy and stuff. And some people go full release dose even on the second day, but a lot of people don't. So it's going to be a, decision with each participant.
Yeah. Thanks for that explanation. Yeah. It's just want to wrap my head around that. And it's, what a beautiful experience as a human. That totally is to me godly to be able to experience this in that type of setting in such a well-structured setting, safety at the maximum, and the trauma-informed protocols that we learned in the 5 training, which is why I got into the training, right? I was like, I had that experience and I was like, how are humans even allowed to have this experience? That's how big it was. It was like, what is this? And so got me into the training. I met you, and here we are today as it goes on and research goes on and peer review studies keep emerging with 5-MeO DMT, and we keep learning more, and there's a lot to learn, and it's a very misunderstood molecule. People often associate it with regular DMT, and I think it's, there's so much. So I'm really fascinated to hear about the results of this retreat and where it goes, because I certainly have my own interests in running a retreat like that in the future. And
yeah, maybe we'll do it again. Like I want to do it maybe once a year. It's doable. And the pricing is like half of what Joelle and Victoria typically charge, because I'm doing it for the first time. They charge what they charge, and I believe they're worth every penny. I'm charging less just because it's my first time running it, and I just want to cover my costs in terms of travel and loss of income in my private practice. But other than that, it's not my full on business model for me. It's just like a one-off experience offering for folks who feel called to do it. And I'm sure it's going to work out great, and it's something I'd like to do once a year. So you and I can talk about possibly renting the space, and I'd like to invite some of our cohort back there again and get together again.
Yeah, for sure. We all got to get back together and have a reunion for sure back in Tepezlan, Tindava, and I know we will. And it felt really special to come through that first cohort together. We're all still I would say we're all still close. I mean, we all talk pretty regularly, at least through some of the group, and that community aspect. Once again, just feeling seen, feeling safe, especially with such a big experience, unexplainable experience in many ways. So yeah, I was so grateful to have that experience with you and what's to come. And I think there's big things to come in that space. And I mean like disruptive stuff, very big stuff. Because as we know, this is not just about getting high and being with God. And there's so much more, like healing with depression, anxiety, getting into PTSD, sexual trauma. We've talked about this on this podcast with Victoria from 5. So, there's major stuff here, very exciting things for the future, and also the concerns of it too, and how we actually want to look at the risks concerned. And these are some of the things that we talk about. But I'm curious, I know we got MAPS coming up. You're one of the key speakers at MAPS in Denver there's like a panel, right? You're speaking on.
I'm not a key speaker, but I'm on a panel. Yeah.
I like to say that though. You're a key. If you're speaking at MAPS, that's pretty amazing and epic. And so what's your panel on, and what are you talking about?
But it's still coming together. So I actually applied to be a speaker on my own for this topic that we're talking about today, psychedelic sobriety, and I had a whole thing lined up for that, but that didn't get approved. And so they decided they still wanted me to be involved, and they put me on a panel called "Bridging the Gap of Real World Psychedelic Use and Substance Use Disorders." And they wanted us, Juliana Mulligan, myself, someone named Maurice Bird, and another person. I think Kevin Franciati is going to be the moderator of that panel. And we're just going to basically be talking about like, what is the research on substance use disorders and what's going on in the real world when it comes to people who are using psychedelics. Are they becoming addicted to them? Are they addictive substances? Are they helping people with their addictions? Are they helping people in their recovery process? What are we seeing in the real world compared to what we're seeing in the research? So we're going to go over that together. It's going to be short. I think it's like 45 minutes. There's 4 panelists. So we're going to have like, 5 to 7 minutes each and answer some questions. It'll be good. I'm psyched I am honored to be a speaker. And maybe one day I will have my own speaking spot there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a big topic. Addiction, substance abuse disorder, addiction. This is huge with psychedelics. And also Joelle and Victoria, they have a party going on, right? Tiandava has their own tent and DJ. So you guys will get to, I feel I am not going at this stage yet. I mean, there's a last minute, maybe I get out there, but I'd love to see you speak, attend that panel, see Kevin, see everyone. And so maybe you'll see me out there. We'll see what happens.
I could see you pulling the trigger on that and showing up. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I might get out of Costa Rica. I don't like leaving Costa Rica right now, but if it is very rainy though, it is extremely rainy. Anyone listening who's here is like, what the, it feels like there's a record rainfall, but it is called a rainforest. So I guess that makes sense. And like if I was up in Stowe and it was a blizzard, it's like, that's normal. And yeah, I guess this is normal here. It just seems real heavy right now.
Yeah.
So what are you most excited about right now, manifesting or bringing to life? Like, what are you most excited about bringing to life right now in your world?
Well, I'm excited to bring about the first annual Magic Mountain Mushroom Festival in Londonderry, Vermont on September 13th. It's an idea that popped into my head. There's a ski area in Vermont called Magic Mountain. And in New England, there's all these mushroom festivals popping up all over the place. There's the Maine Fungi Festival and the Berkshire, Massachusetts Mushroom Festival. And Vermont didn't have a mushroom festival. And for 3 years now, I've put on a conference called Soulquinox, where we had international speakers on psychedelic science and research and spirituality. And they gathered together here in Stowe over a course of a couple of days. And we did that 3 years in a row. Well, last year, it sort of broke my bank, unfortunately. And I didn't feel like going through that pinch point again financially. And I thought of this idea, like the fact that there's a ski area called Magic Mountain and there's magic mushrooms out there. And if there's a way to blend the two, we'll do the Magic Mountain Mushroom Festival. So I spoke to the events coordinator down there and she was super excited about it. She's super excited. It's not a psychedelic mushroom only event. It's really about mushrooms, adaptogens, foraging, safety around mushrooms, eating mushrooms, cooking mushrooms, that kind of stuff. And also, entrepreneurship in the mushroom world and entertainment, having some music come and play. And then there'll be some education around harm reduction when it comes to psychedelics. So I'm super excited about manifesting that here in Vermont. You know me, Jesse, I like to organize things and get people together. So I'm psyched about that one.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sad to hear Soulquinox. I didn't get to attend, but I know you had some, Rick Doblin and some Julie Hall and many amazing guests and speakers at your event. But I'm glad to hear the Magic Mushroom conference or retreat is going to be happening. And when is that happening?
September 13th.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, that's great. Well, this podcast will be out in a couple of weeks, so people will get to hear about that and sign up. And I don't know if I'll be in Vermont then, but if I am, I'll come check it out. That sounds like it's a lot of fun. And yeah, all right. Well, that's exciting. And I feel like we'll bring you on again to have another conversation. But I'm really grateful that we finally got you on the show to talk about this journey and quest you've been on, and just the way you've blended, your psychology background with substance abuse and your personal story. It's very profound. And there's other podcasts people can find about you. I saw one that was like a 3-hour podcast. I'm like, oh God, that's a long podcast, but I did watch some of it. And so just thank you for all the incredible work you're doing. We're going to stay in touch very closely as things are emerging in the world of substance abuse disorder, and in just the emerging world of psychedelics. So
yeah, thank you for having me, Jesse, and thank you for your podcast, the guests that you have on the show, the work that you're doing and trying to get a healthy message out there to folks. A lot of these podcasts, the conversations you've had with the folks on your show, it is really about education. Let's have these conversations. Let's hear the nuances. It isn't a black and white world out there. And every one of your guests, you're highlighting different ways of understanding these topics that are near and dear to our hearts, and trying to help bring in this new era of our collective experience, whether it's addiction, recovery, mental health, psychedelics, business, all the human relatedness. You have exceptional guests on your show, and your podcast is a big part of educating people. So thank you.
Thank you. That means so much. Really appreciate that. Thank you for that compliment. And we're going to keep it going because of what you just said. We'll just keep this rolling, because I wish this was around when I was, just exploring and finding ways to, just improve my dysregulation of my nervous system, things I couldn't understand. So thank you for coming on and your research, and really appreciate you, Dr. Rick.
Thank you.
We'll have you on again soon.
Thanks.
Thank you for checking out Entrepreneurs of Recovery podcast. We are so appreciative that you are here. Make sure you go ahead and like and subscribe to the show on YouTube. Leave a review on iTunes and Spotify so more people can find the show. Once again, thank you so much. We have great episodes and content come out in the future. Thank you for being here. Have a blessed day.